Good morning, I'm Pozzuoli, CEO of Tripp Scott, and today we're going to discuss COVID vaccines and what occurred last week when the president came out and issued an executive order mandating COVID vaccines for federal employees and employers with employees over 100. And so today we have our COO, Paul Lopez.
Good to be with you, Ed.
Paul, so what do people need to know about what the president did last week on mandatory vaccinations?
So clearly the administration is trying to encourage, coerce perhaps, some people might think, force more employers and more people to get vaccinated. So clearly the administration is issuing an edict. And essentially if you're a larger employer with 100 or more employees, it is quite possible that in the next few weeks, as the rules are promulgated, that you may be under a mandate to require your employees to either get vaccinated or get mandatory testing once a week. So that's what's happening, and obviously the administration is trying to drive the numbers up of more people being vaccinated.
But as of today, even though the president made the announcement last week, as of today, is there any rule in place that requires any employer to mandate vaccines or get testing?
So far, no. However, what we heard last week is that the Department of Labor with OSHA are going to be implementing some rules and developing some rules. So we're all watching this day to day, week to week, to figure out what it is that they're going to implement specifically. And it's important because, you know, when the president makes a speech, obviously he's taking a broad brush, 30,000-foot view. The rules, however, are going to be very specific and very detailed. And then that's going to lead to potential challenges to those rules. So what I would tell and what we're telling our clients right now is we have to watch this stuff. Be very vigilant and maybe start trying to get some data and collect some data in your workplace about some of the things that could exempt employees from getting vaccines. For example, the religious and the medical exemptions that apply.
But the religious and medical exemptions, so in other words, the gathering of information as to why that particular employee may fit within that realm.
Correct. That's right. Because as these rules are implemented in the next few weeks, you as a company are going to have to make a decision. Are we going to abide by the rule? And a lot of large employers are doing that already. But if you're not, and if you have 100 or more employees, are you going to abide by it? Or, for example, if you're in the state of Florida, our governor has taken a very strong stance that he believes that these types of rules actually violate the Constitution. So there's no doubt that our governor is going to challenge these rules. So what I would say to an employer is you probably want to at least start understanding what this might look like in your workplace. In other words, if you have 200 employees, how many of these employees fall under either the religious exemption or the medical exemption, just to know what you're looking at as far as who are the group of people that may have to get either vaccinated or tested on a weekly basis.
And the testing aspect of it, who's going to pay for that?
Well, here's the problem. We don't know yet. Right now, what the rules that look like they're going to be developed is that the employer is going to actually give the employees, or the employees should be using their PTO to go get their testing, right? So right there, that's coming out of the employee's pocket, so to speak, because normally your PTO is so that you can take time off for your own personal needs. Now, you're going to start using your bank of PTO as an employee, and at some point, it does cost the company, right? Because when you have employees out of the workplace getting tested, and it might take them a morning to go get tested, depending on the lines and so forth, at the end of the day, it's going to cost the company some money. And the question is who's going to pay for it? And that's where some of these challenges also may be coming from as well, because ultimately, unless the federal government's providing subsidies for this, you're impacting the bottom line of companies. And again, that gets into the challenge of whether it's constitutional. Can the government issue these types of mandates? Does it make sense? So we'll see. A lot of this is, you know, we're watching all this stuff. We're trying to understand it on the fly. The courts are going to be instrumental with respect to how this is going to be unfolding, because obviously we're having courts around Texas. We have some other opinions that are out there that are essentially interpreting the validity of some of these mandates that are out there. But the way we see it, this could end up at the U.S. Supreme Court, very similar to Obamacare, just because of the constitutional nature and the issues that are attendant to these questions.
So if I'm an employer who does not want to comply with the edict from the federal government, can I can I not comply? And what happens if I don't comply?
So once the rules are implemented, the fines that could be imposed could be pretty significant. However, again, it gets back to, in my view and in our view, it depends on what state you're in. In other words, if you're in a state that essentially the governor of that state is going to essentially agree with the administration and enforce these mandates, you as an employer may be well served by abiding by it. However, if you're in a state like state of Florida with Governor DeSantis, who has made it very clear that he's going to challenge mandates, you as an employer may be within your rights not to impose these mandates right now. See how the process unfolds in the court system to get some further guidance. Ultimately, at the end of the day, the approach that we're recommending is use some common sense. You know, you can't ignore this stuff, but you have to be sensible and use common sense in how you are going to interpret or implement some of these mandates. And again, you may have the right not to implement it depending on what's happening in the court system. You know, one of the things that happens is when rules are promulgated, immediately those are challenged with injunctions. Injunctions sometimes can be, we can get a fast track in a court proceeding within literally 2 weeks. You can find out whether a rule is going to be enforceable or not. So I would say right now, the call to arms is find out what's happening, make sure, and we're certainly trying to be very vigilant about what's happening in the court system and what's happening with the rules, because literally this is going to dictate what advice we're giving to our clients day to day.
Small business, to those employers who are under 100, this doesn't apply.
This doesn't apply. This doesn't apply.
So Paul, let's move on to the second piece of what the president ordered. He talked about federal employees and issuing an edict down to agencies to come up with a rule that impact federal employees. What does that rule say?
So the rule is that you have to be vaccinated. In other words,
as a federal employee.
As a federal employee. So if essentially you're working for the federal government, you are not going to have the option of getting tested. You have to go get vaccinated, unless again you fall within the two exemptions, the religious or the medical exemption.
And that includes healthcare facilities as well.
Correct.
That
Correct.
receive federal monies.
That receive money for Medicaid or Medicare, got to get mandatory vaccination.
So basically that's every hospital we know.
Every hospital we know of. Correct.
So Paul, as to recap, what should our clients, what do they need to know today?
So today, right now, what I would recommend to any client is, number one, start figuring out what your workforce looks like. Figure out the people that may not be subject to vaccinations, number one.
Based upon the exemptions.
The exemptions, that's number one. Number two, depending on what state you are principally located in, for example, in Florida, I would watch what your governor is doing. I would watch the legal actions that are taking place once these rules are put in place. Because remember, Ed, right now we don't have the rules. We're going to get the rules hopefully sometime in the next week or two, and then you're going to have to see what type of challenges are made to those rules. And then, frankly, seek guidance from your counsel, whoever you're working with, to figure out what it is that makes the most sense for your workplace given the current circumstances, because it's evolving every day.
But assume for a second, one last piece on that, assume for a second that our understanding is that roughly 17 governors have come out against these mandates that the president proposed last week. If one of those are successful, wouldn't that apply, as an example, the unconstitutionality potential of this kind of policy, wouldn't that apply to everybody in the country?
It's a great question, and that's probably not a bad way to look at it, and that's where I kind of think that this is going to probably end up at the U.S. Supreme Court, because if ultimately one state is successful in challenging this order, there is no doubt that the federal government is going to take a challenge to that and probably go to the U.S. Supreme Court at some point. And that may take 90 days, 120 days, 180 days, we don't know. But it's possible that could happen.
But the key question here for those who are watching is to stay on top of this topic, be vigilant about it, and seek counsel if there are any questions.
100%. You got to monitor this stuff day to day, put your Google alerts on, whatever it is that keeps you up to speed on what's happening with these types of policies and these types of rules. You got to watch it every day.
Paul, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.